Hello and welcome back, everybody. I'm Keith with this current installment on world government UFO disclosure activities. Today's installment comes to you courtesy of the fine people and government of China. China, as like all of the other entries into this discussion forum, have had a long and extensive history with the UFO UAP phenomenon. Some common characteristics here to start off about China, its government and society here. China is the most populated country on the planet with 1.45 billion citizens. That represents 18.5% of the world's population. In regards to the ufology, UFO, UAP phenomenon and disclosure reporting in China, as is characteristic of some other countries in our survey, everything UFO must get government approval. So disclosures, reports, whatnot are very centralized and go through the China various government agencies. Disclosure has happened, and disclosure typically happens in the characteristics of China as the case actually happens. So as I take you through some of the details on some of the case studies and whatnot, reports will have been issued on a case-by-case basis as opposed to a large data dump that has occurred with many other world governments. The People's Liberation Army, or PLA is the acronym, is the overriding body of the Chinese government in terms of the ufology profession, disclosure, and dissemination of information. So let me go now into a little bit of sighting history, and then we'll move on into other characteristics of the disclosure phenomenon in China. As I mentioned, China is kind of like Mexico and Chile, for two examples, as other countries whose main majority body of witness evidence, case reports, case studies comes in the form of visual, video, and sometimes audio phenomenon. And what I mean by that is, as I go through the cases here with China, most all of these case reports will describe sightings, witness sightings, videos, extensive though they may be, as opposed to other forms of concrete evidence such as scientific or electromagnetic phenomenon or whatever. It's not to say that those have not been those observations have not been made and recorded. It's just that for whatever reasons, the China government does not disclose anything to do with scientific or EMF analysis of any kind other than the visual, audio reports and sightings and testimony of individuals. So, like I said, China is kind of characteristic in this way, like Mexico and Chile in these respects. So, the China experience begins well over 12,000 years ago, where they have in their archives stone plates, various relics, and various written forms of communication in terms of case studies and whatnot. The current age phenomenon, like most of the other countries surveyed in my study here, begin in the very late 1940s, where again, sightings from witnesses that include visual, photographic, video evidence, and sometimes audio evidence. So some of the more seminal cases: in October 1947, there was a flap. Then again, in July of 1957, a second flap. Then fast forward 1965 in Beijing, where it was written that up to 8 million people witnessed two discs, shiny objects, in which they maintained and were observed to have the flight characteristics, airborne characteristics of typical UFOs, UAPs, in that They would stop instantaneously, hover in the sky, turn, start up again with accelerations that biologically human beings, at least as far as our knowledge takes us, could not be able to survive. So you've got all of those physical characteristics that are anomalous to other forms of life or other phenomenon in the natural world and our atmosphere and whatnot. So fast forward then, in October 1978, another report where near Beijing, where 100 military pilots captured on video and presumably other forms of evidence such as radar and measurements of other EMF forces and whatnot. But 100 military pilots chased discoidal discs or disc-shaped objects through the skies near Beijing. Again, July 24th, 1981, in yet another report near Beijing. And then in 1995, on March the 13th, a pilot in Guizhou province noticed again a UAP, which in addition to the physical velocity characteristics of starting, stopping on a dime, achieving breakneck speeds, not biologically friendly to human beings and whatnot. But this pilot also exhibited that these discs actually changed its shapes, colors, and in addition to the velocity and physical speed characteristics and trajectory that I just mentioned. Now, fast forward a little bit, the more popular disseminated reports coming out of China. On October 19th, 1998, in Kangzhou in Hebei province, military jets again and over 150 public witnesses witnessed what was described as a mushroom-shaped craft with legs. This craft actually landed, and while there were no reports, at least currently, disseminated of occupants actually being observed or whatnot, this was a very popular and the report, again, as characteristic of the China government, was made shortly thereafter the time of the sighting, as opposed to the government withholding reports and then just doing a data dump all at once. Two more of the most popular sightings in China's history. In December of 1999, in Shanghai, over 100 witnesses and 3 television crews took video lasting over an hour and a half, over 90 minutes, roughly 100 minutes worth of video of these discoidal-shaped crafts. The most recent and most popularly disseminated report of an incident occurred on July the 7th of 2010 in Hangzhou's Shaoxing Airport, in which, again, disc-shaped and cigar-shaped craft were seen flying over and around the airport to the point where they shut the entire airport down. That's very, very unusual. There was a case in the U.S. similar to this in the 1980s in Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Now, it didn't shut down O'Hare, but the report became very popular. And incidentally, I did write up about both of these incidences that I'm speaking about now in my first book, which is my reference guide, The Humaniverse Guide to Better Reasoning and Decision Making. So you can look up details in that book on some of these China cases and some of these other cases that I've been talking about throughout my series to get more detailed reports. So now let me go into, again, as China does disseminate information, they are very active in public and official government and government approved groups. Any public group in China has to be approved by the government in order to exist. So various UFO UAP groups in China include the Hong Kong UFO Society. This was formed in 1996 at Hong Kong University, where incidentally Hong Kong University does offer an academic degree in ufology. So that's a curious as we move closer and closer towards ultimate disclosure, acknowledgement of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligences and whatnot, more and more academic university settings are now offering coursework in the profession of ufology. So Hong Kong UFO Society, I'm going to give you here the website of a YouTube video, which is your best source for obtaining information on the Hong Kong UFO Society. I'll give you the website here for the YouTube video. You go watch the video, and then you'll be able to obtain more access information for the Hong Kong UFO Society, and including a history on this organization. So, and as I've mentioned in all my other videos, reports on world government disclosure, you can tap into my Facebook page, The Humaniverse, and I encourage you to do that, to also obtain the website information for you to increase your knowledge on this. So other organizations in China, the China UFO Research Association is another one, and two more, the World Chinese UFO Federation, which is the oldest currently active one, formed in 1991, and then also another source group, so to speak, more of a journalistic bent and flavor, madeinchinajournal.com. So if you want to tap into any or all of these resources to find any up to current and extensive information on the UFO UAP phenomenon in China, please visit any of these websites here that I share with you. So now, as I mentioned, the China government is very centralized, and they have very tight control over the ufology career, ufology profession, and dissemination, disclosure of information. As I mentioned, circling back to the beginning, the People's Liberation Army is the main source. That's the interface between the government and the public in terms of reporting and disclosure. But all of those other government agencies involved include the Chinese Air Force, the Army, police, radar, weather and meteorology bureaus, the China Academy of Sciences, which own and operate the observatories, astronomical observatories in China, and then the Ministry of Science and Technology. So all of those agencies are kind of interweaved with each other in terms of the ufology ET phenomenon. It's the People's Liberation Army, as I'll mention here to you as we segue into the disclosure part of my discussion here today. I'll mention the People's Liberation Army in just a second. In August of 1985, as I mentioned, China reports their disclosures on case-by-case basis, but back in 1985 in August, there was actually an academic conference held in Dalian where 40 research papers were presented at Rangun Jinan University. Jinan University was the site where this week-long symposium was held, in which 40 research papers were broadcast and discussed. The conclusions from that conference, the takeaway was that UFOs are an unsolved mystery with profound world influence. This was in 1985. So then we get to the proliferation of the PLA, People's Liberation Army. Even though the PLA existed before 1985, the PLA did disseminate their protocols for UFO study, research, and reporting, in that it is a process, in that the military keeps control of the initial first steps in the process. They obtain the information, then they study and disseminate it to a national database, and then from there, and this is just a recent third addition to this process, in that the reports and data are then transferred to a UFO task force. Now, this UFO task force in China was only created in 2020, August of 2020. So that is kind of was a pretty important signal that China's government disclosure efforts are becoming more and more transparent and proliferate. So again, three-step process. The military, from the PLA, they control information, they transfer it to a database for further study, and then that's passed on to the UFO task force, which then interfaces and then broadcasts to the public their findings and reports. So this was part of the PLA, the central agency, so to speak. So other disclosure efforts, on October 19th of 1998, again on a case-by-case basis, the Kangzhou incident in Hebei province. Again, as I circle back, I mentioned that mushroom with legs sighting by military jets and private citizens. Report was issued shortly thereafter the study concluded in this Kangzhou mushroom with legs incident. Fast forward, October of 2018. Now, this is very curious, in that China and Russia were the leaders in the development of an organization, but also symposiums. The event was called the Five Continents UFO Forum. Now, again, formed by ufology experts and communities in China and in Russia. There were two symposiums held, the first one in China and the second one in Moscow. Now, the reason I go into this is because this was the birth of the currently existing International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research Organization. Its acronym is ICER. I've done on my Facebook page, both my personal and the Humaniverse pages, I've done extensive reports on this International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, the ICER group. My friend Gary Hesseltine and Donald Schmidt are two of the worldwide directors of this group. They're currently. I'll read the details of the minutes of the Five Continents UFO Forum. The first one was held in China in October of 2018, followed very shortly thereafter by one similar type of meeting in Moscow. But the platform was to launch a worldwide UFO society. About 35 representatives from 35 different countries met in arriving, representing various countries throughout the world. Brazil, A.J. Gavard, Donald Schmidt of the United States, Gary Hesseltine of the United Kingdom, many other writers and ufology researchers. The Chinese UFO Association, which was back then the main financial resource for putting on these symposiums and the initial development of the ICER organization. The Chinese UFO Association has over 1 million members. So they conducted these two symposium. And then what happened was, as I'll give you the details over on my Facebook page, my Facebook Live, on my personal page, and the Humaniverse page, my reports on the ICER history and development. When the pandemic hit in late 2019, early 2020, China and Russia basically backed out of any further consideration or at least public financial support, leaving the ICER group and its maintenance up to the current board members, who again include Gary Hesseltine and various worldwide members, and they conduct their meetings in San Marino over in Italy, and they have just recently sent a formal proposal to the United Nations to reopen their ufology office and to basically get the international UFO ICER organization up and running, which will include permanent annual think tank, so to speak, to be held in San Marino, which will invite members from the ufology community worldwide to study the phenomenon. So again, the provenance and startings of the ICER organization actually began in China and in Moscow, as I'll mention in my talk on Russia also. So very important seminal events and some openness in terms of China's activities with the UFO phenomenon. In September of 2020, I mentioned China's astronomical observatories' involvement with the ufology phenomenon. They opened up a 500-meter aperture spherical telescope. Its acronym is commonly known either as FAST, F-A-S-T, or Sky Eye. Sky Eye, it's the largest radio telescope existing in the world. It's like the U.S. is in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, the radio telescope that was in existence starting in the early 1970s until just recently, a couple of years ago. So Sky Eye is the biggest currently active radio observatory in the world, and again, they study astronomical phenomenon, and they have also studied the potential for UFO, UAP, or message phenomenon. And I report that in September of 2020, there was actually two messages that were obtained and then reported and studied, at least for a little while. Zhang Tanji, who was the chief scientist at Beijing Normal University, whose team discovered these two sets of signals, potential messages. There was some study broadcast in the public, and then all of a sudden, all further reports and of that incident were redacted. So nothing has been learned since that particular point in time. Fast forward once more to just this past June of 2022 in Dalian City, Baigong. Mount Baigong is the site for an expedition that was conducted by various ufology and archaeological and anthropological scientists in Qinghai province. They were looking for ET relics and other artifacts that were reported to have been discovered in and near the Mount Baigong region. There is yet to be a report broadcast or disseminated regarding the conclusions or studies of the Mount Baigong incident, so we await further word on that. So that wraps up my survey at this point of the China government efforts in world UFO disclosure. Thank you very much for tuning in, and my broadcast series will continue at my YouTube page. Please take a look, venture in on all of those. There's probably going to be 16 or 17 videos in total. Thanks for listening, and again, tap into my Facebook, The Humaniverse page for website information and for you obtaining further knowledge on the ufology subject of China and all the countries that we're surveying. Thanks for all your listening. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.